She let a man cut in line at the ATM, not knowing he'd just lost everything and was a millionaire in disguise. "Please. I'm sorry, but could I go ahead? Just this once, it's urgent." The voice cracked through the sound of pounding rain and impatient sighs. Everyone turned. A man stood there, drenched to the bone. His hair was a wet, tangled mess. A suit clung to him, soaked and crumpled, stained with dirt. His shoes squelched with every step. There was something desperate in the way he held his arms close to his chest, as if trying to shield himself from more than just the rain. Nancy stood at the very front of the line, one person away from the ATM. Her blonde hair was damp at the ends, tucked behind her ears beneath a thin hood. The plastic grocery bag at her feet held a loaf of bread and a small carton of milk, dinner for her and her 6-year-old son. Her umbrella, faded red with a broken spoke, shielded only half her frame from the downpour. Her coat was too light for weather like this, but it was all she had. Behind her, the line curved along the sidewalk, dozens deep. Some huffed loudly. "Unbelievable," someone muttered. "Go to the back like everyone else," a man barked. "Yeah, we've been standing here for 20 minutes, another woman added, arms crossed tightly, mascara running. The man didn't respond. He only looked at Nancy. Not pleading, just waiting, as though her response might be the final straw. She looked into his face. Behind the wet hair she saw eyes rimmed with fatigue. Not the kind from a bad day, but the kind that comes from too many bad months, maybe years. His lips trembled from the cold, but he didn't beg. He just stood, soaked, humbled, shoulders heavy as if he carried more than the weight of his own body. Nancy glanced toward the ATM, so close. She could already hear the beep of the person ahead typing in their PIN. A few more seconds and it would be her turn. She thought about the money she needed to withdraw, just enough for rent and groceries. The thought of walking all the way back here tomorrow in another storm, after a 10-hour shift at the bakery, made her stomach churn. She turned her head back toward the man. Then, without a word, she reached up and tilted the umbrella toward him. The man blinked, stunned. She took a step forward, placing the handle of the umbrella into his cold, wet hands. "You can take my place," she said softly, then gave a small smile. "And this, you look like you need it more than I do." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She stepped past him, away from the awning of the ATM, and walked to the very end of the line, where the rain poured without mercy. The crowd murmured, a few people scoffing, others going silent. One woman shook her head in disbelief, but Nancy didn't look back. She stood in the open, hair plastered to her forehead, the cold seeping through her coat, soaking her socks and into her bones. Still, her eyes held no resentment, only quiet tiredness and a strange kind of peace. The man stood motionless for a beat longer, umbrella in hand. Rain no longer pounded his face, but he didn't move. He turned to look over his shoulder. There she was, at the back of the line now, hugging herself against the rain. She did not meet his eyes. His throat worked as he swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes that wasn't from the weather. Then, slowly, he stepped up to the ATM. When his turn came, he withdrew a small amount of cash. He didn't count it. He just pocketed the bills, turned, and walked back out into the storm. But his eyes never stopped searching the line. By the time he reached the end, she was gone, just a shadow slipping away into the rain. He looked down at the umbrella still in his hands. His knuckles whitened around the handle. He whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Thank you." The rain continued to fall. But for the first time in weeks, something inside him felt dry and warm. Not because of the umbrella, not because of the money, but because someone, without asking, without knowing, had given him kindness without reason, and that, in his world, was rarer than gold. Nancy finally reached the front of the line, soaked and chilled to the bone. The rain had plastered her golden hair to her cheeks, and her hands shook as she inserted her card and punched in her PIN. Her feet ached. Her back throbbed from standing at the bakery's oven all night. She kept thinking about the man in the suit and hoped, truly hoped, he had made it to wherever he was going in time. She finished her transaction quickly, grabbed her groceries, and turned down Maple Street toward the nearest bus stop. But when she reached home, fumbling with the keys in the rain and pushing open the creaky apartment door, her breath caught. Her purse was there, slung over her shoulder. Her groceries were intact, but the wallet, the one she kept in her coat pocket, was gone. She dropped everything on the kitchen counter and searched the coat, then the bag, then the folds of her hoodie in desperation. It was nowhere. Nancy stood frozen for a moment. Then she slumped into the kitchen chair, rainwater dripping onto the cracked linoleum floor. The wallet had her ID, the bakery punch card, Lucy's drawing from last week, and the few $20 bills she had left after rent. And now it was gone. She could not go back. The buses had stopped running, and even if they had not, she had no more cash for a fare. The ATM was miles away. It was late, and her limbs felt like lead. Her eyes stung with frustration, not so much at the wallet, but at the weariness always waiting just behind her breath. Quietly, she stood up, tiptoed into the small bedroom where her son lay curled under a fleece blanket. His chest rose and fell softly, thumb resting near his cheek. Nancy brushed damp hair from his forehead and knelt beside him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She peeled off her wet jacket, tossed it over the chair, and pulled an old sweater over her head. The heater rattled to life, weak and uneven. She filled a mug with water, warmed it in the microwave, and cradled it in both hands. Steam rose, and with it, a little calm. She sat by the window and watched the rain streak down the glass. The city outside was quiet, glistening. She thought about the man, the way he had looked at her like he could not believe she was real. Maybe, just maybe, someone would find the wallet and turn it in. Or maybe it was just gone. She took a sip of hot water and curled her legs up on the chair, letting the warmth fill her chest. Outside, the world drowned in gray. Inside, a mother sat in the dim light, holding on to the last bit of hope like it was all she had left. The bell above the bakery door chimed softly, blending with the sweet aroma of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee. Nancy, with her blonde hair tucked behind her ears, was carefully wiping the display glass. The morning rush had ended, leaving behind a peaceful calm. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, a welcome change from last week's relentless storms. She didn't notice him enter at first. He stepped in quietly, yet something about him made heads turn. Dressed in a charcoal coat over a crisp white shirt and polished shoes, he had a presence both composed and weary. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, and although lines of exhaustion marked his face, he carried himself with a calm confidence. He paused just beyond the glass, watching Nancy work. "Excuse me, are you Nancy?" His voice was gentle, respectful. Nancy froze, cloth in hand. Slowly she turned toward him, eyebrows raised in surprise. "Yes, I am. How do you know my name?" He gave a small smile and stepped forward. "I believe I owe you something." Reaching into the inside pocket of his coat, he pulled out a small, worn leather wallet. It was familiar, unmistakable. Nancy stared in disbelief. "My wallet!" she gasped, quickly drawing her hands and reaching out to take it. "Where did you find it?" "In front of an ATM, last Thursday, in the rain." He placed it in her open palm, voice soft and even. Recognition flickered across Nancy's face as she peered up at him. The rain, the ATM, the razor-thin thread connecting them felt both distant and sharp. He looked like someone else, dignified where she remembered desperation. But those eyes— "You're the man from the line," she said slowly. "You're the one I gave my umbrella to?" He nodded. "Yes. You gave up more than your umbrella that day. You gave me your place." She stared, speechless, as memories cascaded in the quiet bakery. "You look different." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was not at my best that day," he confessed with a gentle laugh. "Still, you saw me." Nancy's cheeks rose in a soft flush. You looked like you needed help." He paused, then said quietly, "I did, and not just because I was cold. Nancy tilted her head, curious and compassionate. He reached into his coat again and drew out a small folded piece of paper. "I found this inside your wallet," he said. Unfolding it, Nancy recognized her son's drawing, crayon lines depicting her and her little boy under a rainbow. Her heart tightened with warmth. "He illustrated this for me," she murmured. "I carry it always." He nodded, voice soft. "That drawing told me who you were." Her gaze lifted, meeting his. "You knew where I worked from that?" "There was a name tag." He ran a hand through his hair. "I asked around." Nancy's throat tightened. Her pulse picked up. "You reminded me that kindness still exists," he added softly, "that compassion can heal." A silence settled. It was not awkward, but tender, reverent. He smiled and tucked the paper away. "I wanted to thank you that night, but by the time I got back you were gone. All I found was your wallet." Nancy's voice shook as she confessed, "I thought you might have left it for someone else." He met her eye. "I came back because you were the first person in a long time to see me, not the broken man, but a person worth helping." Tears pricked her eyes. She swallowed, voice trembling. "That's beautiful," he offered a gentle smile. "Can I see you again? I'd like to know the woman from the rainstorm." Nancy felt a warmth unfurl inside. She nodded, softly. "I'd like that." The small corner of the bakery was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of cutlery from the kitchen. Sunlight filtered in through the front window, spilling a gentle glow over the 2 cups of coffee on the table. Nancy sat across from Edward, still unsure what to make of this man who, days ago, had been a shadow under her old umbrella and now looked like someone from a magazine cover. But his eyes, they still held that same weight, that same quiet ache. "Thank you for agreeing to sit with me," Edward said, his fingers wrapped around his mug. Nancy offered a polite smile, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Honestly, I was curious. You seemed different, not just the suit." Edward gave a short laugh. "Yeah, it's been a strange time." He looked out the window for a moment before turning back to her. "I lost my wife to cancer 2 years ago. We were married 25 years. She was everything to me." Nancy's smile faded. "I'm so sorry." "She was sick for a while. I couldn't accept it. I started drinking too much. Missing work. I handed over more responsibility to my assistant, someone I trusted." He paused, jaw tightening slightly. "She stole everything, cleaned out accounts, manipulated deals. By the time I realized, I was already buried in grief and barely functioning." He looked down into his cup. "I checked into a facility last year, voluntarily. I needed help. I needed..." "Quiet." Nancy watched him, her heart tugging. There was no arrogance in his voice, no bitterness, just exhaustion. "I walked out of that place with a backpack and a prepaid card," he said. "Everything I had left fit in my pocket. I was a ghost in a crumpled suit. I didn't think anyone would see me." Nancy's throat tightened. "But I did." Edward met her eyes, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then gently, Nancy began, "I know something about that feeling, of disappearing." She sipped her coffee, then set the cup down slowly. "My son, Sam, got very sick when he was 3. A rare blood disorder. We didn't have insurance and the hospital bills kept piling up. I took every shift I could find. I sold my car. I borrowed money from anyone who would listen." She looked down, her fingers brushing the rim of her mug. "My husband couldn't handle it. The stress, the debt, the fear. He left. Said he needed a fresh start." Edward's eyes darkened with empathy. "I held on," she continued, "for Sam. He pulled through, but the debt, it never went away. And now it's just me and him, trying to stay afloat on what I make here." She smiled faintly. "He's better now. He's 7, loves to draw, and thinks grilled cheese is the best invention on earth." Edward smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across his face. "He sounds like a good kid." "He is," she whispered. There was a long pause. Outside, a cyclist passed the window. A couple walked their dog. The world moved gently around them. Then Edward set his coffee down and placed one hand flat on the table. "I thought I had lost everything," he said softly. "Money, love, purpose. I was ready to disappear completely. But then, there you were, standing in the rain, giving your umbrella to someone who looked like he had nothing." Nancy looked at him, eyes wide. "I will never forget that moment," he continued. "Not because of what you gave me, but because of what you reminded me. That kindness still exists, that people still care, even when they have so little to give." His voice shook slightly. "I had not felt that in a long, long time. You changed something in me that day." Nancy blinked back tears. She had never imagined that one small act could ripple into someone's broken world so deeply. He smiled at her. "So, I just wanted to know you, the woman who stood in the rain for a stranger." She smiled back, this time from somewhere much deeper. "I'm just someone trying to do the right thing," she said quietly. Edward looked at her, eyes soft. "So am I," he whispered. And in that quiet corner of a humble bakery, two people, broken in different ways, began to see each other for who they truly were. The bakery had become something of a ritual. Each morning, Edward walked in just as Nancy was unlocking the front door. He brought fresh coffee from a place down the street, and sometimes small things, flowers for the counter, a new towel set for the sink. He never announced his gifts, he just placed them quietly where they belonged. In the afternoons, he stayed late, helping her lift heavy flour sacks, restocking the shelves, wiping down trays. He never overstepped, never tried to impress. He was just there, in the quiet, where her burdens used to echo. They talked, but not always. Sometimes they just worked, side by side, breathing in the warm scent of baked bread and cinnamon sugar. And slowly, a sense of peace settled in, the kind that only comes from being seen, not saved. One late afternoon, while prepping for a weekend rush, Nancy reached for the sugar jar on the highest shelf. Edward was already reaching too. Their hands brushed, then overlapped. Nancy froze. So did Edward. The contact was brief, but not forgettable. Their fingers touched, warm, hesitant. They both pulled back quickly, a half-second of panic flitting across Nancy's face. She looked up and met his gaze. It was not passion. It was something softer, more terrifying. The vulnerability of two people afraid to hope again. She swallowed, managing a small laugh. "I guess we both wanted sugar." He smiled, stepping back to let her take it. "You first." They moved on, but something had shifted. The next day, the calm shattered. Nancy had just locked the register and was heading to the front door to flip the sign when she heard it. A loud bang. Then another. Outside the glass door, 3 men stood, tattoos snaking up their necks, one with a crowbar slapping against his palm. The smallest of them banged the door again with his fist. Nancy's heart jumped. She recognized them instantly. "Come out here, sweetheart," the tall one shouted. "You think you can hide forever?" Nancy backed away from the door, chest tightening. They were from the loan agency she had borrowed from when Sam was sick, the kind that didn't take missed payments lightly. She had begged them for more time. They had given her none. "I know you're in there," the man barked, yanking at the door handle. Nancy's hands trembled. Her eyes darted toward the back, toward the office phone, when a shadow moved past her. Edward. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately, placing himself between her and the men. When he opened the door, the wind caught his coat. The moment was silent except for the bell above the frame. The tallest man looked Edward up and down. "This does not concern you, old man." Edward's voice was calm, cold. "It concerns me now," the man scoffed. "She owes us. Interest, late fees, real money." Edward stepped forward until he was just a breath away from the man's chest. "She owes you nothing. I will settle every cent. Today." The 3 men exchanged glances. Edward's tone had weight, the kind that came from someone used to being heard. The smallest one grunted, "Fine, but she'd better be clean after this." Edward didn't flinch. "She will be." They turned and left, disappearing into the alley. Nancy stood frozen behind the counter, her breath caught in her throat. Edward turned slowly, shutting the door behind him, and walked back toward her. "I didn't ask you to do that," she whispered, voice shaking. "I know," he replied. "I could have figured it out. I know." She looked at him, eyes filling. "Why would you?" "Because," Edward said gently. "No one should be made to beg for surviving." She stared at him, the weight of everything pressing against her chest. He offered the smallest smile. "And because I never forgot the woman who gave away her umbrella and her place in line." Nancy's lips parted, but no words came, just gratitude, and something new, something terrifying. Hope. Nancy stared at the envelope in her hands. Inside was a printed job offer, part-time administrative assistant, flexible hours, fair pay, benefits included. She looked up at Edward, sitting across the bakery table, his expression as calm and steady as always. "I don't need your charity," she said softly, not out of anger but out of fear of owing more than she could give. Edward leaned forward, folding his hands. "This is not charity. You said you wanted to repay me. I am giving you a way to do that. No pressure, no tricks." "But at your office?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "It is not a skyscraper, just a small community business center I run. A few real estate properties, some local grants, small investments in things that matter. I could use help organizing files, scheduling calls." "It is work, Nancy, real work." She hesitated. "I want you to be in control," Edward added. "But I'd like to keep you and Ben close, safe." Her heart stung at that. He was offering her dignity, not pity. "So?" She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll try." The first weeks were quiet. Nancy worked 2 afternoons a week at Edward's office, mostly sorting documents, handling basic admin tasks. It was a small, sunlit space above a florist's shop, with old wooden floors and a coffee maker that hissed more than it brewed. Edward treated her like any other employee, respectfully, professionally. But every so often she caught him watching her with the kind of gaze that held more than gratitude. It scared her, and yet it warmed her too. On days she was too tired to pick up Ben from school, Edward offered. Just once, she told herself. But then it became once a week. Ben, normally shy with strangers, quickly warmed up to him. Edward had a way of speaking to children like they were equals, not fragile things, but people with full hearts. "Mom, Mr. Edward helped me with math today," Ben said one afternoon, grinning as he held up a crayon-drawn picture of the two of them building a rocket out of numbers. Nancy smiled, that quiet ache in her chest returning. One Friday evening, after closing the bakery, Edward and Nancy stopped by the grocery store together. She had planned to run in and out, but he insisted on helping. In the cereal aisle, Ben darted ahead, grabbing a bright red box and proudly declaring it the fun kind. Nancy rolled her eyes, but Edward laughed and tossed it into the cart. At checkout, Nancy reached for her wallet, but Edward had already swiped his card. "You keep yours," he said softly. "Consider this part of your work bonus." She frowned. "You have to stop doing that." He looked at her, eyes kind. "I don't have to. I want to." That night they had dinner together, spaghetti and garlic bread at Nancy's small apartment. Ben chattered away, telling stories about school, while Edward listened with a smile that never left his face. After Ben went to bed, Nancy brought 2 cups of tea to the couch. They sat in silence for a while, the soft hum of the heater filling the space. "I never expected any of this," she said quietly. "Not after everything." "Neither did I," Edward replied. "I thought I was done. With life, with people." She looked over at him. "But you're not." He shook his head. "No. I found a reason to try again." She looked away, afraid of what she might feel. Edward did not press. He just sat beside her, sipping tea, letting the stillness say what words could not. Over the next few weeks, they became something of a team. Edward fixed her leaky kitchen pipe. Nancy brought leftover muffins to his office. They took Ben to the park on Sundays, where Edward taught him to fly a kite and Nancy laughed for the first time in weeks. Their hands brushed again once while reaching for a plate. Neither pulled away quickly this time, but still, nothing was said. No declarations, no promises, only the quiet growing of something deep and real. It was not love yet, but it was the shape of it, and sometimes the shape is more powerful than the word. Nancy arrived at Edward's office one Friday afternoon with a tin of cookies. The lights were still on, unusual for this late hour. She hesitated before stepping inside. Files lined the walls. A metal tin of pens sat neatly beside a large envelope marked Neighborhood Scholarship Fund. Edward sat at his desk, reading a letter with a soft smile, unaware of her presence. "Hi," Nancy greeted, setting the cookies down. Edward looked up, surprised. "Nancy, I did not hear you come in." She returned his smile but glanced at the envelope. "That scholarship? You set it up?" He nodded, quietly. "For kids who need help with school, gear, even bus passes." She folded her arms. "But your name's never on it." "I do not want credit," Edward said simply. "Someone helped me once without asking for anything. I want to give back that same way." Nancy's chest tightened. She remembered that rainy night, the feeling of helping a stranger, never expecting anything in return. Edward added, "I want people in my life because they choose to stay, not because they owe me." She whispered, "I think you're one of the kindest people I've ever met." He gave a quiet smile. The silence between them was warm. A few days later, Nancy stopped by to help review documents. She carried Ben's school folder under her arm. Edward was already seated, removing his coat when he winced and held his chest. "Edward?" she asked, stepping forward. "Just dizzy," he muttered, but his hand shook as it gripped the desk. She reached for her phone. "I am calling an ambulance." He stopped her gently. "Please, just stay." But then he slumped in his chair. Nancy rushed to support him, dialing as she kept her voice steady. "Hold on, help is coming." In the ambulance, she held his hand tightly. "Edward, please stay with me." He opened his eyes in a hospital room hours later. Nancy sat at his side, eyes rimmed with worry. "You came," he said hoarsely. She placed his hand to her heart. "Of course I did. It was a mild heart attack," he whispered. "They say I will be fine." She let out a breath. "You scared me." "You were the first person I thought to call," he admitted. She gripped his hand. "Do not disappear. Not now." "I promise." Weeks passed. Edward returned to work. The scholarship continued in secret. Nancy and Ben often visited, sometimes for a quick coffee, sometimes just to say hi. One Friday, Nancy lingered outside the office. She held a letter addressed to the scholarship fund with her name listed as a recipient through Ben's school. Smiling, she knocked and stepped inside. Edward looked up, surprised. She handed over the envelope. "This came for you." He chuckled. "They should not send those to me." She reached across the desk, folding his hands around hers. "You already are making a difference." His eyes met hers, sincere. "You really think so?" She nodded. "You do it every day." He exhaled, his voice soft. "You saved me in the rain, but since then, you've helped me find myself again." Nancy's eyes glistened. "You're already everything you're trying to be." He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. They stayed in the warmth of that office, quiet but deeply connected. Two people bound not by promises or debts, but by the choice to remain. Because love is not always loud. Sometimes it is found in stillness, in showing up, and in simply staying. The snow began drifting outside as Nancy and Ben entered Edward's home. Their breaths puffed in the cozy foyer, where a large Christmas tree shimmered with white lights and golden ornaments. Soft holiday music filled the air, mingling with the warm scent of pine and freshly baked gingerbread cookies that Nancy had brought. Ben's face lit up as he dashed across a plush rug to the tree, lifting a snowman ornament and shaking it with delight. Nancy smiled, her blonde hair brushing her shoulders, and placed the plate of cookies and spiced cheese tarts on a nearby table. "Come on in," Edward greeted, stepping over and smiling as he held the door. He wore a deep green sweater and dark jeans, his silver hair mussed as if he'd been arranging decorations. His usual tension was gone. He looked genuinely content. Ben rushed into his arms. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Edward," he exclaimed. Edward lifted him and tickled his ribs until both erupted in laughter. Nancy absorbed the scene, flickering candles on the dining table, cozy throws on the couch, and twinkling lights around the fireplace. In that warmly lit room, she felt safe and truly at home. Edward guided them toward the table, pulling out a chair for Nancy. "I'm glad you two came," he said softly. Nancy bit her lip. She wasn't sure at first. He paused, placing his hand gently over hers. "I wanted tonight to be special." Ben scampered to unwrap a small gift under the tree, model rocket parts for their planned family science night. His squeal of excitement filled the room. Nancy watched him with tears of joy building in her eyes. The journey from that rainy ATM line to this laughter-filled living room felt miraculous. As Ben sipped his hot cocoa by a rug, Edward handed Nancy a modest box tied with green ribbon. "This is yours," he said. Nancy untied it with shaking hands and carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay her umbrella from that stormy day, worn, faded, and familiar, along with a letter sealed in wax. Edward spoke softly. "I wanted you to have this again. It belongs with you, because of what it started." Nancy unfolded the letter, her heartbeat steady with emotion. "I found my life again under this umbrella that day. I thought I was invisible, broken, but your kindness reminded me that compassion still exists. I found hope and a family. This umbrella isn't just fabric, it is proof that one small act can rebuild a life. We owe each other nothing but kindness and presence." Edward, tears glistened in Nancy's eyes as she looked at Edward. "Oh, Edward." He lifted her hand to his lips. "You found mine," he whispered. "I just wanted to return it." Then he kissed her forehead, a gentle, reverent touch that spoke volumes. Nancy closed her eyes and allowed herself to lean into the warmth. Ben, watching from his seat, slid over to wrap his arms around them both. "I love you guys," he said softly. Nancy kissed his hair. "We love you too, Ben." The three of them sat together beneath the glow of candlelight and quietly playing carols, snow drifting outside. They were a family, formed not by blood, but by kindness, trust, and a shared journey from loneliness to belonging. Edward reached into his coat and pulled out a card reading, "Love is the family we choose." Nancy looked at him with hopeful eyes. He took a breath and asked, "There's one more thing. Will you marry me?" Her response was a tear-dribbled, enthusiastic yes, and he laughed against her hair. He then turned to Ben. "Son, would you do us the honor of being our best man?" Ben's grin lit the room brighter than any ornament. "Yes, absolutely!" Under the twinkling lights and a starry winter sky, two people who had once stood alone found each other and built something stronger than anything they had lost. They were no longer strangers. They were a family. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you that kindness matters, that love can find us in the most unexpected places, and that families are not always born, they're built, then we invite you to stay with us. There are more stories like Nancy and Edward's, stories of grace, of healing, of second chances. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories and join a community that believes in hope, in human goodness, and in love that finds its way, sometimes through a storm, sometimes through an old umbrella, but always at the right time. Hit that subscribe button and let your heart be moved again and again.